Yeah, it's Rachel. Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here this evening with you, Yusuf and Tariq, and to all of the guests who will speak at this beautiful event this evening. And I also share the previous speakers' gratitude to you both and to your organizations for the incredibly important work that you do in anti-racism and making sure that we have these important conversations and that we're a part of as citizens, a part of the important work of justice and ensuring that Indigenous people, here we are today on National Indigenous Peoples Day, but all people of color and in our country have a good experience in their life and not the experiences that I think that we're coming to reconcile. This is the history of Indigenous Crown relations in our province. I have the good fortune of being able to represent Saanich North in the islands as a BC Green MLA, not a Green Party of Canada MLA, a BC Green MLA. But I also have the good fortune of being part of a community that has Chief Don Tom, the Vice President of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, as our chief here, the home chief. And so Don and I have grown up together, and it's quite inspiring to see him, and I pass along his regrets for not being able to attend. And as I often say about the Indigenous leaders in our province and across our country, that they are some of the most powerful leaders that we have in our country. I don't know that many people understand the portfolio of responsibilities that someone like Chief Tom and his colleagues at council on the council here in Tsartlip have to manage. They manage international relations with our federal government. They manage interprovincial relations with our provincial government and all of the portfolios that fall underneath the 20 ministries within our provincial government: education, healthcare, child and family services, environment. All of those responsibilities land on the chief and council of our community. But they also are responsible for all of the local government, what we would see at our municipal governments: land use, land planning, governance between the relationships of our families. And I would challenge any of my colleagues in the provincial government or my colleagues in the federal government to have to manage such a portfolio with so little resources, to have to go cap in hand day in and day out to the federal and provincial governments. So when we hear our provincial and elected politicians and our federal elected politicians acknowledge the work that we have ahead, it really does come to understanding that Indigenous leaders do more today with less than any other leader in our country. And it's remarkable the work that they do, and we have to hold them up and lift them up, and the power that they have, and they're really, really incredible. I really like to thank the leader of the federal NDP, Jagmeet Singh, for his straightforward talk, for speaking truth to the power that is in our country and speaks to the provincial government as well. I've really appreciated Jagmeet Singh's ability to cut straight to the core of what it is that we need to be speaking to talk about racism in a way that reflects how people feel when they are the survivor of racist treatment. And I really appreciate his willingness to stand up and to create discomfort, because it's that discomfort that my family and my relatives have felt every day, day in and day out, being an Indigenous person in this country. Discomfort being in your own territories, discomfort being in your own places. And so today, well, National Indigenous Peoples Day is a different day every year for me. This year, it's one of reflection and it's one of mourning. Our communities are still in mourning from those babies that were found, that we all knew were there, but that were acknowledged. And I see Canada finally waking up to this. And I think that it's important to recognize that as Canada and Canadians awaken to the reality of our history, that those resources that Indigenous nations need to be able to indeed do all of that work, to effectively negotiate with different Crown governments over the rights and title that those Crown governments speak so easily about in words, that they see that recognition, is that we understand that of the billions of dollars that are extracted from these unceded territories each and every year, that Indigenous people see very little, if any, of that. And so when we're working to build our healing centers, and when we're working to build our houses of governance and culture, the longhouses, whatever they look like across the country, now is the time for the federal and provincial governments to recognize that the benefit that they've been extracting from these territories off of the backs of Indigenous land, it's now time to have a different approach. It's easy to say these words, it's easy to say these things. It's very difficult for those people in power to be able to give up any of it. And so I encourage my colleagues in the provincial government, Premier Horgan, all of his cabinet, to follow through on the commitments of the rhetoric with the actions. We have an action plan in British Columbia with dozens and dozens of actions, and I look forward to working with this government over the next 3.5 years and long into the future to ensure that the government follows through on the commitments that it's made. So that when we are celebrating National Indigenous Peoples Day, that we're doing it and recognizing the incredible contributions that that Indigenous people make and Indigenous cultures make to the lands, and that we're celebrating the change from the colonial perspectives that have gripped this country for decades and centuries. With that, I thank you for this opportunity to speak, and I'll continue to stand in the legislature as my federal colleague, or my federal political colleague, I should say, speaks so clearly and straightforward way about the situation that we face, and I'll continue to do that in the BC legislature as well. And a lot of love to all of the families, all of our families, some of the families that I see represented here, but all of our Indigenous families across the province and the country, as you go through your processes in mourning to reconcile within yourselves the history of the residential school and the impacts of the Indian Act that it's had on us, that there are people that will continue to stand up and speak to the governments to ensure that we see justice. And it's just a lot of love and compassion that I have for the mourning that our families are in now for this National Aboriginal Day, which is normally a day of celebration, but I think today it's a day of reflection, acknowledgement, recognition, and a day of mourning.